Well, this is an interesting thing. Leg protection, I think, laminated armor, because certainly some of the early ones clearly show the bands on the legs. Later on, it's possible if you there's a very famous bronze statue, Parthian, which shows a tall man with a small head,
Yeah.
wearing a crossover jacket, and he has two little daggers on his sides,
Yes.
and he's wearing big baggy pants. But when you look at them carefully, they're not pants. For English people, I'm talking about trousers. They're like chaps, like what cowboys wore. So they except that they were full tubes, and they were actually attached at the back of his belt, and you could be wearing anything under that. And the baggy trousers shown in the Sasanian rock carvings, it doesn't mean because you can't see armor there is no armor there. Because if you put on armored legs, you would attach them to your belt so that you could rotate. If they were attached to the upper armor, then when you tried to rotate, you'd pull your leg armor off center.
Yes.
So therefore, you'd attach them to the belt. And I mean, if I refer to modern European plate armor, when I say modern, I mean 14th century. They had little points, they called them, little strips of leather or cloth that were attached to the doublet they wore under their armor, and lots of the bits of armor were tied to that rather than being tied to other bits of the armor. So this kind of thing is not unusual. Whether they went from laminated leg armor to mail leg armor, I don't think there's any proof. We don't know. It just depends on how much their legs were attached. They were riding without stirrups. I would guess your legs are fairly vulnerable because you don't, I mean, you can pull them right up, but you might fall off your horse when you do it. Whereas with stirrups, you've got a certain amount of secondary support. And as for infantry, the sources on infantry aren't really good because the Romans weren't interested in the Sasanian infantry very much. And of course, the Sasanian sources are hardly surviving. And when you're going to carve a giant statue of the king on a rock, you normally put him on a horse because it makes him look good. I mean, you may have noticed that all of those Sasanian kings have exceptionally broad shoulders, much higher ratio of broad shoulders than there would be in a normal population. So it's not representative art. It's propagandistic art. We're making out how good the king is. The king is never wearing a helmet when he's fighting in Ardashir and Shapur I, never wearing a helmet because it's the king. We know that the army was wearing helmets, but we don't know exactly what they look like. Luckily we found, when I say we, I mean the whole modern world. There is at least one Sasanian helmet from the 3rd century, which is the Dura Europus one, which is certainly one of the earliest. And so we know that they definitely wore helmets. And the fact that this helmet and its structure is echoed in later helmets means that this was part of a long tradition that lasted possibly into the 5th or 6th century.
And they use different helmets, correct? Yes. They use different helmets. You know, this Spangen helm, as we say it in Germany, you know, this Spangen helmet, and then they use also one-piece helmet as well. Am I correct, Bede? Some of examples.
I think there might be. I think the most common one in collections is a 2-piece helmet with a band down the center.
That's right.
And everybody relates that to, it's a copy of a Parthian king's hat from a coin. Well, no, I think they copied the hat from the hat, and the coin and the helmet are both copies, not one from the other. It's just bad expression, but that type of helmet is actually quite a good design because if a blow comes in like that, it throws it off to the side. Yes. And it's very strong front to back. So if you get a blow coming like that, it's not going to break.
Yes.
And I think it was again Simon James who pointed out that there are later Roman helmets that are much later than this. Quite clearly, the Romans saw these helmets and thought, "Hey, this is a good way to make helmets."
Yes.
Romans are always good at adopting ideas that were either better
Yes.
or more economical? Because
Yes.
costs kept going up.
So the arms were legs were laminated, right? Laminated
Certainly
armor.
in the early period, yeah.
Yes.
Third century, yeah.
Yeah, and the arms were also laminated.
Well, we know that the Romans and the Hellenistic Greeks used laminated arm armor. And we know they did the leg armor too. Now, the fact that the Sasanians had the laminated leg armor, they probably had laminated arm armor. But the thing is, it's not shown. And there could be two reasons for that. One is it was not worn on top of their garment. It was actually worn underneath. And there's no reason that that wouldn't be true.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, going as far east as the Japanese, kote and things like that could be worn under a kimono.
Oh, yeah.
And nobody would know you were wearing male sleeves.
Yes, they did sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think we didn't integrate it was these, how can I say, have you seen the protective gloves made of steel?
Which are gauntlets, yeah.
Yes, gauntlets.
There's several of them. Germany, some in Iran.
Yeah.
These are really interesting because this is a very early development of articulated hand armor.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about it. Where else do you see? Well, first of all, surviving. There's virtually nothing surviving from the Sassanid period in Rome or China or anywhere that could be identified as an articulated gauntlet. This is really quite interesting. When I first saw them, I went, "What? Really?" And then I thought about it. The major use of gauntlets, from some modern understandings anyway, is when your sword doesn't protect your hand. So later swords, like 19th century swords, have these nice guards. I mean, in India, you have phalanges. I've got one over there. They've got a sheet of steel that protects the hand.
Yes.
But of course, Sasanian swords, as they appear on the reliefs, and I'm not talking about the beautiful swords with the silver coverings that have been found, because they don't look like the ones on the relief and are possibly from a different tradition within Iran. But the ones on the reliefs have crossguards like later European medieval swords. They look, honestly, in proportion, they look like a 12th century European sword. It's just 600 years earlier.
And there were excavated ones. Early Sassanid swords, which are these scabbard slide system, they're excavated pieces, you remember? And then later on P-shaped, yes, exactly.
Yeah. So there's influences there. As you say, like there wasn't just one type of helmet used in Iran. We're looking at an empire, not a country, not a nation state. This was an empire. It had big areas. I mean, when it was reorganized into the 4 regions, was that Khusra and Isherwan? They clearly recognized they have different regions. We had Sasanian armies going into the Arabian Peninsula just before the time of the Prophet. We had Sasanian armies in Central Asia. We had Sasanian armies in what's now Afghanistan when they overthrew the Kushans. We had Sasanian armies in what would, like Baluchistan area and things like that. We had Sasanian armies going up into the Caucasus, fighting the Huns and various other people. They were fighting different types of people, and they were a complex of cultures joined by the monarchy. So Eastern Iran, I always feel, is a different place in the sense that its culture, while strongly linked to Western Iran is tied into very, very old Mesopotamian cultures. I mean, when the Parsa tribes moved in there and they mixed up with the Elamites, they took a lot of stuff out of that culture. You go into, say, in the northeast, you have these ancient settlements in Khorasani going back thousands of years before the current era.
Yeah.
So it was an ancient, deep culture there too. And yeah, these cultures get overthrown, but sometimes stuff remains. And the general look of Eastern Iran is much more like Central Asia than it is like Western Iran.
And we found towards, I mean, coming to end of our research, then we were contacted by Mr. Katachi, Mohsen Katachi from Iran, who teaches, who is a very good, in animations, and he's also an artist and also teaches it at a very famed institute. He contacted us and provided us with pictures, information, and film of this Sassanid bust Izad Bahram. And then we also integrated that into our article at the end. First of all, this is Izad Bahram, which he provided. We found out that it was already published. Could you tell us where it was published?
Yeah, it was published in. I'll just call it up now because I've got the book here in front of me. It was published in Historia East or SHEDET in number 9, 2020. And the article that I found on it, because when this was brought up, I thought, well, this is fairly significant. I've got to see. I was really just looking for better pictures, to be honest. That's the kind of thing. So there was a Patrick Skupniewicz from Siedlce University in Poland, who published an article on this. This might not be the one I was thinking about, but he published an article. I think he published an article back in 2017, to be honest. I'm just trying to find it. No, I haven't got it in front of me, unfortunately. I've got the later reference to him, but this was, I mean, because it's quite detailed. Admittedly, it's the top of a column, and as we've discussed about this, and I think it's in the article as well. A lot of the Sasanian rock reliefs and this kind of thing, the male is very big, and the reason I think is because it was viewed from a distance. The sculptures now at Naki, Rustam and places like that, they're close to ground level, but ground level has risen 20 or 30 feet since when they were made. And this thing was meant to be on top of a column, maybe 30 feet in the air. And so they make this to look bigger. When we've got Khusrau Parviz, supposedly on his horse in the grotto, that you could stand right next to. And I mean, it was, twice life size or more, but the armor, the rings were much more realistic in their size. So that's the first thing. When you look at this, you've got to say, wow, is it like a baidana in Russian where you have giant rings that you wear over another male shirt? No, I don't think so. I think what we're looking at is an artistic convention to make it possible to identify we mean male from a distance. This Bahram, he's quite eclectic in the types of armor he's wearing. His helmet looks, it's what sometimes is called a lamellar helmet, mainly because it's made of plates with lots of holes in them laced together or riveted together. You can't tell from this sculpture, but it's not like just a Spangen helm where you've got 4 inside plates and 4 outside plates. This looks more complicated than that. He's got a male aventail attached to the helmet, and it appears that the male is lined because there is a clear border around it. And it also appears that maybe it's got a flap that folds out so you can tighten it up and get it up under your chin and everything. This was done in Europe in the early Middle Ages, and it's just a practical solution. I'm not suggesting there's any influence. I think it's just one of the easy ways of making this work. And you've got to remember that caps with ear flaps were quite common from back in the 5th, 6th century BC. So this is not an unknown thing. You could just model it on a cap and do it, and you would get a much better coverage, because the throat is a vulnerable area. And if it's double, I mean, it might actually be two pieces wrapped around each other, but you can't tell. It's a sculpture.
Do you see any plate on his chest?
This was the thing that really puzzled me. It appears that the upper part of the chest has what could be like a circular collar, a big collar, and it appears to be made out of discs, and maybe a pair of discs and then half discs overlapping each other, or maybe a pair of concentric discs like the chest armor seen in Chinese sculptures of roughly the same date, or maybe because he's wearing a little cloak with a clasp over it, it's hard, you can't see the whole thing. So maybe it's actually just a collar with a series of round-edged scales going all the way around. All of these things would work and all be useful. The part that's striking is that below that, you can see a series of ridges with what appears to be a central piece,
yes,
that have round dots along the bottom,
yes,
which could be representing a series of strips of iron riveted so that the top one overlaps
yes,
the next one down, and then it's riveted through, which would make a easy to mass produce but fairly solid breastplate. Maybe it's not a whole breastplate, maybe it starts here, you know, like, and goes down, but that then gives you the flexibility because it doesn't look as though it's flexible. So therefore you've got a thing that protects the soft part of your body, that part of your abdomen that there's no ribs, that part that can be cut, that contains intestines that are full of bacteria that you do not want to get cut under any circumstances. It could very well be that. And that would be really interesting. That's certainly one of the things I thought. We've subsequently got more photographs and a little bit of video of it, which gets you a better feel for it. If that's the case, there were what appear in Pianji Kent about 120 or 30 years later. Some of the wall paintings are showing armors that may be strips of leather or metal laced together in that fashion, not riveted so much, but laced. And this might be an example of an early version of this moving west and being co-opted with, well, he's clearly, there's a skirt of mail coming out at the bottom, so he's wearing a mail shirt under it.
yes, clearly. Yep.
And we know it's not a long sleeve shirt like the old traditional Sassanian ones from, you know, Naqshi, Rostam, or places like that, because it's got terragaze on the shoulders,
yes,
which is a Hellenistic fashion or a Roman fashion. So we're looking at, it's something that's very novel. To me, it looks like a combination of different images, that the person that made this sculpture had taken good bits from several things and put them all together. But on the other hand, it does look practical because it gives you extra defense here down in your abdomen and extra defense across your shoulders. Because, I mean, this is vulnerable to cuts.
yeah,
This is an
absolutely.
area you've got to protect. And I think I said at the time, in the Strategicon of Morris, he points out the Byzantines adopted a padded collar from the Avars that did just that. It protected that area up there, and it didn't interfere with your movement.
Yes.
So we might be looking at something like that. It could be the series of superimposed discs. There are surviving Tibetan horse armors where superimposed pieces are, this is hardened leather, so you might have a disc and then a ring that the opening is smaller than the disc.
Yes.
They look like they're riveted together, but in fact, if you look at the back of them, you realize that the rivet heads are in fact little domes of hemispheres of metal with a crossbar soldered in, and they're actually laced through those. So they're acting like little buttons all the way around. It does look like riveting, but the advantage it has over riveting, it's much lighter and much easier to repair. It could be that, but there are no rivets shown on that. The lower part, definitely what look like rivets. It's certainly not part of clothing, because it looks fairly rigid. But this is, I mean, this is new. We've looked at quite a few things in the past, and every now and then somebody, I mean, this was sitting around for quite a long time.
Yeah.
It's not like, and it was published, as I say, I think 2017 was the earliest. I'd have to look that up. I should have looked it up, actually, but I thought I'd found the right one, but I hadn't. I'm just looking through, because I sent you a link to it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find the link.
Yeah.
And it's somewhere around. It's not that important at the moment. But the fact that the person that I think it was published in the hats, turbans, and helmets compilation. The person that published it was interested mainly in the helmet.
Yes.
They weren't actually interested in the body armor so much. And as often the case when people are doing little diagrams from this, they often mistake bits for other bits. So that bottom male skirt, which is basically a scallop skirt with a series of vines joined by flowered vines and flower, you know, just da-da-da-da-da. That was mistaken for all kinds of wonderful things, because they didn't actually look at what it was and didn't know that this type of decoration, it's all over the place in Sasanian Iran, in rock art and plasterwork and things like this. This is a thing they really liked. Yes, and but that was really interesting. I went out and found several references to it, because I wanted to find different photographs from different angles. And as I say, the article, the earliest article I can remember is about the helmet and how it was this type of helmet and that kind of helmet. Eventually, I found a better photograph of the head, and it was like the helmet on Khosrau's horseman.
Yes.
There's much more in the drawing than in the actual carving, and when you look very closely at it, you've got to wonder whether the person drawing it, if they drew, in most cases it's drawn from photographs, they've imagined a lot of detail that isn't there in the original. You know, you've got to be very careful. Archaeological drawing is a real art.
Yes. And
you can't just take a photograph and get a computing drawing program and go over the top of it and think that you've done a drawing. A real archaeologist gets out there and does a measured drawing and gets the detail right. I mean, there's some Russian and Chinese archaeological books that are works of art because the drawings are so good and precise. There are, I mean, Western European ones as well, but in the context of the things that we're talking about.
Yes.
Excuse me, I've got to bend down because I just noticed that the power cord for my laptop just fell out.
And Bede, I would like to thank you for being here for our discussion. We can continue it at another time, possibly. It's a very interesting discussion we are having.
Yeah, I'll pull up some more references. It's one of those things where we start these discussions and we're not quite sure where they're going. We know what we're talking about.
Yes,
but
that's right.
You might bring up something or I might bring up something and we both get interested in it and then we drift off a little bit. I mean, you know, if you want to see us at our best, you read our papers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
If you want to see us having fun, you listen to us talk to each other.
Yes, and the paper, I'm going to reference it here in this video below in description. Thank you very much, Bede, and see you soon. And thank you for taking your time being on Raznosar TV. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
You too.